The progress bar blinked once, then vanished. Olivia clicked upload. The screen refreshed to show a view count of 0. She sat back, the plastic chair creaking in the stillness of her studio. The only sound in the room was the low, rhythmic hum of a second-hand camera sitting on a tripod. It was 3 in the morning. Outside, the city moved, but in here, everything was frozen. She checked her phone. The banking app displayed a balance that hadn't moved in weeks. She refreshed the page again, hoping for a single notification, a comment, anything to bridge the gap between her desk and the world. There was nothing. The inbox remained empty of opportunities. She stared at the cursor, her reflection caught in the dark glass of the monitor. The air in the room felt heavy, smelling of stale coffee and cooling electronics. She pushed the camera aside, cleared a space on the desk, and picked up a pen. She didn't have an audience yet, but she had a schedule. She marked the calendar for tomorrow morning's upload, her hands steady, ignoring the silence that pressed against the walls. She was not waiting for an invitation. She was building the structure, one frame at a time, while the rest of the world slept. The pressure arrived in polite, measured tones over lukewarm coffee. Friends slid printed listings across the table, circling roles with benefits and steady hours. Family members sent emails detailing corporate hierarchies, their voices thick with concern for her future. They saw a girl with a hobby that didn't pay the rent. They saw a waste of time. Olivia listened, nodded, and pushed the papers aside, her eyes fixed on the empty space beyond them. She kept a small book open on her lap, the pages worn from constant reading. Napoleon Hill had written that every achievement begins with a burning desire, and she lived by that. While they talked about retirement plans and office politics, she was sketching a media empire on the back of a napkin. She did not see content. She saw intellectual property. She did not see followers. She saw a global community waiting for a signal. The noise of the cafe faded into a dull drone as she mapped out the infrastructure of a business that did not exist yet. She left the coffee shop, walked past the office buildings they admired, and returned to her desk. The world called it a dream, but she held the blueprint in her hands. The 5-year stretch began with a simple, brutal commitment. Upload every single day. The first year was a clinic in invisibility. When view counts stalled at double digits, she did not quit. She moved the tripod. She spent 4 hours adjusting a single lamp to eliminate a harsh shadow on the wall. She studied the framing of every shot, looking for the error in the composition that kept the audience away. When comments failed to appear, she tore her scripts apart. She rewrote the openings, shortened the transitions, and stripped away every word that did not serve the core idea. The room became a laboratory of incremental gains. She kept a ledger, tracking the performance of every frame, marking the spikes and the drops with clinical precision. She stopped relying on sudden bursts of intensity and instead adopted the rhythm of a machine. If a script failed, she analyzed the failure, adjusted the pacing, and started the next one immediately. She treated the empty, quiet studio like a high-stakes production floor. Every morning started with a setup, every afternoon with a recording, and every night with an edit. She was not just making videos. She was building a system, one disciplined, grueling day at a time. The change did not arrive with a fanfare. It arrived as a relentless, rhythmic pinging from the laptop at 3 in the morning. Olivia opened the dashboard and watched the numbers climb. A single video had breached the threshold, pulling thousands of viewers from the void. Then, the feed updated again. The algorithm had finally latched onto her consistency. It began pushing her work to new audiences, and the surge was immediate. The comments section, once a graveyard of silence, exploded with questions, debates, and requests. She watched the data flow, a river of engagement that had been dammed up for years. Then came the financial notification. The revenue numbers, long stagnant at 0, began to tick upward with every passing hour. It was not just a spike. It was a landslide of validation. She sat in the dark, the blue light of the screen illuminating the desk she had sat at for 5 years. The bank account balance shifted, moving from a source of stress to a tool of expansion. The years of isolation and grinding repetition had finally cracked the wall. She was no longer shouting into an empty room. The world had arrived, and it was demanding more. The influx of revenue hit her account and sat there for exactly 1 hour. Olivia did not buy a single luxury. She pulled the ledger from her drawer and began to map the transition. Every dollar was redirected into the operation. She posted her first job listing, filtering through applicants until she found an editor who understood the pace she had spent years perfecting. She hired a producer to manage the logistics she had previously handled alone. The studio room, once a cramped space for one, became a headquarters for a team. She did not stop there. She enrolled in night classes, sitting in rows of desks to dissect the technical principles of cinematography and narrative structure. On weekends, she drove to active film sets, signing in as an unpaid volunteer. She spent those 12-hour shifts standing in the shadows near the grip trucks, watching how the lighting crews rigged the bounce boards and how the directors managed the chaos of a live set. She recorded every movement in a notebook, translating the professional techniques she witnessed into her own production workflow. She was dismantling the amateur creator and rebuilding herself as a business owner. The transition was calculated, relentless, and absolute. Olivia stood in a conference room, the finalized script for her first independent feature resting on the mahogany table. It was a massive financial risk, a project that demanded every cent she had generated from her digital channel. Her mentors sat across from her, their expressions tight. They pointed to the numbers, the volatility of the market, and the high probability of a total loss. They urged her to play it safe, to produce smaller, guaranteed content instead. Olivia listened to the silence that followed their warnings. She looked at the contract. If this film failed, her company would dissolve, her bank account would empty, and she would be back in the studio apartment with nothing. She took the pen from the table. She did not hesitate. Her signature cut across the bottom line, finalizing the commitment. The ink dried, locking her into a path where only success could prevent total financial ruin. She closed the folder, stood up, and walked out of the room. The gamble was set. She had traded her security for the chance to build something that could not be undone. There was no longer a path back to the safety of the algorithm. She was now fully invested in the high-stakes reality of the cinema industry. The first day on set was a lesson in attrition. By noon, the budget was already fraying at the edges. Olivia stood behind the monitors, watching as the lighting rig flickered and died for the third time in an hour. Cables snaked across the floor, and the air in the soundstage was thick with the smell of overheated electronics. A technician approached her, voice tight, announcing that the main camera had suffered a sensor fault. It was a production-ending delay. The crew went silent, waiting for her to panic. Olivia did not move. She stepped onto the floor, walking the length of the set to inspect the hardware herself. She remembered the nights in her studio apartment, fixing gear with nothing but a screwdriver and sheer persistence. She grabbed a spare unit from the storage crate, bypassed the damaged link, and rerouted the feed. She didn't shout. She didn't seek consensus. She simply pointed to the mark and signaled for the cameras to roll. The set was a battleground of broken parts and impossible timelines, but she held the line. Every crisis was met with the same mechanical logic she had honed in silence years ago. She was not just directing. She was forcing the project forward through the debris of daily failure. The premiere night arrived with a crushing silence. Olivia sat in the back row of the theater, the screen glowing with the final frames of her life's work. Her hands were locked together in her lap. She watched the back of the audience's heads, waiting for the first sign of movement or sound. The final credits began to scroll, and for a heartbeat, there was nothing but the hum of the projector. Then, a single person stood up, then another. The applause started as a ripple and surged into a roar that filled the room. Olivia felt the heavy weight of the last 5 years lift from her shoulders. She looked at the screen, then at the people rising to their feet in genuine appreciation. The gamble had paid off. The box office numbers would confirm the victory by morning, but the roar of the crowd was the only validation she needed. She stood up, her breath finally coming steady for the first time in months. The doubt, the sleepless nights in her apartment, the failures, they were all gone, replaced by the reality of a project that was no longer hers, but the world's. She walked out of the theater into the night air, the success of the film already firm beneath her feet. The view from the 64th floor was a map of the city she now helped define. Olivia sat at a desk of polished glass, the surface clear of everything except a single phone and a tablet displaying global market analytics. The silence here was expensive, broken only by the rhythmic ping of notifications. She picked up the receiver. An investor on the line pushed for a compromise on the upcoming release schedule, citing market volatility. Olivia did not hesitate. She countered with a data projection that silenced the room. She was not asking for permission. She was dictating the terms of the next 3 years. When she hung up, she moved to the floor-to-ceiling window. Below, the city was a grid of lights, but she remembered the exact dimensions of her old studio apartment. That room would have fit into this office corner 10 times over. She traced the edge of the glass, watching the traffic flow like blood through the streets. Her phone chimed again, a notification from a production hub in another time zone. She tapped the screen, approved a budget transfer, and turned back to her desk. The transformation was complete. She was no longer waiting for opportunities. She was building the infrastructure that created them. A knock echoed against the glass door. A young creator entered, eyes darting around the expansive office. Searching for a shortcut to the success he had seen on screen, he asked for the secret. Olivia did not look up from the blueprints on her desk. She gestured to a stack of heavy volumes. "Stop chasing fame," she said. "It is a shadow. Focus entirely on becoming valuable." She leaned back, her chair swiveling to face the window. She told him that money was simply the byproduct of the problems one solved for others. Fame would inevitably fade, but the engine of utility was permanent. The young creator shifted his weight, absorbing the weight of the words. He left the room in silence. Olivia turned back to her laptop. She opened a blank project file, her fingers hovering over the keys. The scale of her operation was global, but the intent was identical to that first night in the studio. She began typing the first line of a new plan. She was already 3 years ahead of the present. The camera was different, the city view was wider, but the core remained a dream, a plan, and the refusal to quit.